There's a lot of really interesting cameras out there on the market, but I think this one is one of the most interesting that I've used. This is the DJI Osmo Pocket 3, and we're going to talk about it today because there's some really cool features about it, but then there's also some things that I'm not really loving. So hopefully in this video, I'll be able to help you make the decision of whether or not this camera is right for you. So to keep this video simple, I thought we would focus on three main themes. And the first one's gonna be the functionality and use, sort of the shape and appearance and kind of how you use it. The second one, we're gonna talk about the exposure and autofocus. And then lastly, we'll jump onto the computer and we'll look at some of the footage that this camera produces. I'm not going to go into too much detail talking about the build of this camera. Basically, it's a DJI drone gimbal mounted to a controller. So you can control all of the settings of the gimbal using the handheld controller and the joystick that's on it. It's capable of shooting a wide variety of resolutions, including 4K at 60, as well as 1080p and 2.7 at 60. Everything in this video was shot at 4K 60. If you'd like to know more about this camera, I've linked the DJI website down in the description. One thing I absolutely love about this camera is just how fast it is to turn on. All you have to do is flick the screen open, the camera powers up, and you're ready to shoot within less than 2 seconds. I would venture to say that it's actually a little bit faster than opening up the camera app in the iPhone and shooting with ProRes Log. So if you're looking for easy filming when it comes to auto settings, this camera might not be for you. Because it's about the same size as like the GoPro style cameras or the Action Osmo cameras, you would think that the auto exposure and the autofocus would work similarly to those cameras, but in my findings, it's quite a bit different. The auto exposure, for example, seems to find kind of the brightest spot in the frame and then expose for that. And to really get a good even exposure, you'll have to go into the manual settings. And when you do that, the screen size isn't that big. And then when you're using the camera and you're tilting it and you're kind of moving around, the reflection on the screen makes it hard to see exactly what the exposure level is. That to me was a big downside. The other thing is, as you're moving the camera around and you're going from more of a ground shot up to a sky shot, the exposure will change quite abruptly. And so anything that's in the camera's frame is going to get a lot darker while it exposes for the sky. And then again, in order to get around this, you need to set the exposure to be manual, and then that can be kind of difficult to adjust using the screen that's on the back of the device. As for the focus, I had pretty much the exact same issue as the auto exposure. I'm not sure if it's using some kind of older contrast detection autofocus system versus like a newer phase detection. I tried to do some searching online, but I couldn't find an exact answer. But it really seems like it is contrast detection because it does a lot of hunting. And then it also doesn't do a very good job like tracking a subject. So once it thinks that a subject is no longer needed to be in focus, it will immediately focus to the next subject that it thinks it needs to be in focus. And there's only 3 autofocus options available on the camera. There's the single point autofocus, which you'll touch the back of the screen to select the autofocus point. And then there's continuous, which is where it does most of the hunting. And then there's something called product focus, which I haven't actually played with that. I would assume that that's more for like a rotating product object or something. So this was really disappointing if you're planning to use this from like a run and gun perspective. It can hold focus pretty well on a single face in the frame. However, if you're doing a lot of motion shots, a lot of kind of those panning gimbal shots, most likely it's going to be hunting for focus. And if you want to get around that, you'll need to use the single point focus, and then you'll have to actually use the screen to touch and say what exactly you want to be in focus. And the upside to this though is that you can get some really cool bokeh shots where you can't get something like that typically on like an Action 4 or a GoPro style camera. So shots like that make really good cinematic looking footage, But again, if you're not going to have the time to sit there and actually control the exposure and the focus point on every single shot, then it really doesn't make sense to use a camera like this. As for the colors, I feel like DJI always does a really good job with their color science. Greens always look fantastic, and there's a lot of possible adjustments available for like shadows and highlights. So I didn't really have any complaints there. It was mainly on the auto exposure and the focus that made this camera a little bit more challenging to use. But if you have the patience to work with that, in my case, I've got kids and a family and we're always moving and we're super fast on the go, and so I don't want to do a shot and then come back to find that half the shot was out of focus or the exposure was changing weird or something like that. I'd prefer more of an auto setup where I can trust that the auto exposure and the focus is working better than this was, so that I can get back and not have to worry about the footage being totally unusable. So what did you guys think of the Osmo Pocket? In my opinion, it's not my favorite camera, although it is really unique, and I love that. I love that manufacturers are taking chances and trying to do something different, but it just feels a little weird to use, whereas you can pull out your iPhone and get very similar shots, if not better in some cases, and it's much more portable, much more mobile. I mean, right now, like, I have this whole thing that I have to keep, and I'll just show you too, like when this is off, and then you have to put it down into its case, which is just a little fiddly, and once it's in its case, then it kind of fits in your back pocket. So, I mean, it's not too bad. You know, if you have like a camera bag or something that you're always traveling with, you know, you can just throw it in there. But if you're really trying to be run and gun and just on the go and you've got kids and all this stuff, it can be a little cumbersome to use. So let me know what you guys think of the Osmo Pocket 3 down in the comments. And as always, I really appreciate you guys checking out the channel and watching our videos. Stay tuned, we'll be posting a new video soon.